We are going to redeem America's name.
So major news coming out of West Asia today with Israel and Hamas going forward with the ceasefire in Gaza after Hamas shared the names of hostages that were to be released under the terms of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. Now, despite the fact that a ceasefire agreement was reached, Israel launched military strikes in Gaza. 13 people were killed, according to the latest estimates, which puts something of a spotlight on how durable and lasting such a ceasefire agreement can be. Lots of questions surrounding this agreement, whether it will lead to a better future for West Asia or whether it is simply an interruption before hostilities erupt again. Joining me now to unpack exactly these questions about the ceasefire deal in Gaza is Dr. Waiel Awwad, a senior journalist who has covered India, has covered West Asia, and is also a well-known West Asia strategist. Dr. Awwad, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. Could I ask you to begin by telling us a little bit about this Gaza ceasefire deal? How was it achieved? What are the terms of this agreement?
Thank you for having me. I think the agreement was reached in Doha along with the Qatar, Egypt, and of course the United States, where we had two envoys. One envoy was the President Biden envoy, and for the first time, the coming President Trump envoy was also present in the discussion along with the Israeli negotiator. So this deal was nothing but the pressure from the United States, especially from President Donald Trump, on Netanyahu to stop this war, because the deal was on the table since May, June last year, and Netanyahu was delaying it intentionally because of his coalition partners, because of his own objectives. The main objective, you remember, that Israel have put is to elimination of Hamas, liberation of all the terrorists, and ending Hamas influence in the Gaza Strip, and expelling the Palestinians from Gaza. But all these have failed, except for the destruction, the total destruction and the killing. So therefore, when President Trump put the pressure and asked Netanyahu to end it, so the deal was struck, and this deal will go for 62 days, where it have three phases. The first phase of the deal will be the release of 33 Israeli held in captivities in exchange of 737 Palestinians who are serving either life imprisonment, long-term imprisonment, and some of the detainees without any trial. So there will be three leaving Israeli ladies or soldiers who will be also released, and each one of them will be in exchange of 30 Palestinian prisoners. So this will take place later in the day, but the ceasefire is on, and now we have the phase one is already on. Despite all the fact, I think the latest figure we have right now is that 20 Palestinians have been killed and more than 30 been injured in different areas with the drone attack by the Israelis. But overall, the situation is under control and calm, and we could see the people in the street, the Red Cross, the exchange of happiness mixed with fear is also in jubilation in the streets of Gaza Strip.
Right. Could you tell us a little bit, Dr. Awwad, about how the ceasefire deal has been received both in Israel as well as in much of the Arab world?
I think in the Arab world, or on the whole world, and not only in the Arab world in particular, in fact, there is a huge of relief for the ending of the hostilities, because the amount of killing, you know, that 150,000 people killed and injured, 46,000 of them children and elderly women, including 15,000 of unknown, they are still under the debris, gave a very very destructive pictures of what's happening inside Gaza strips, and all this suffering have created an outrage all over the world. So therefore, there is a jubilation even inside Israel who wanted to end this war for two reasons: A, that they wanted the hostage to come back home, and B, they wanted an end to Hamas, but they don't want this war to continue unabated. So therefore, they decided that this is a time where you should have this sort of a deal. And I think that jubilation in the international community is nothing but a relief that there can be a pressure on Israelis, especially by the American, to end this war. And let's see if truce will continue or it's just a temporary phase, and we may go back into a perpetual violation for permanent war, because reshaping of the Middle East is started for long years. But I think Netanyahu was speaking of a new Middle East order, but it turned out to be a new Middle East disorder.
Could you tell us a little bit, Dr. Awwad, about some of the concerns that have come up about this agreement? You just mentioned it yourself that phase one of the agreement, of course, will involve 33 Israeli hostages being sent back. And of course, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners will also have to be released. But there are, every single day, you're going to have hostages be released on both sides. And at this point in time, we still have not had any clear negotiation of phase two, which will involve Israeli withdrawals from large parts of Gaza. What will that look like? That phase two, which will really involve some dialing down of tensions and a lot of trust on both sides, has not yet been negotiated. So lots of concerns right now about whether this peace deal will be able to hold up in the long term. And also, of course, there are serious questions about whether there are factions in Israel as well as in Gaza who perhaps don't want this deal to go through. How durable do you think this deal will be? How open do you think it is to falling apart because of domestic tensions, because of the lack of trust between the different parties who are negotiating this agreement?
I think you asked a very important question, because this is not the first time there's a deal between Israel and Hamas. And this is a vicious cycle continued for years, even after 17 years of occupation of Hamas, of Gaza Strip by the Israelis, besieged from the sea, from the sky, from the land. And still, the Palestinians are so resilient and fighting back because they don't want to stay under occupation. But the Israelis have already had a plan for this. And in fact, the main sufferer of this will be the government of Netanyahu, because there are now lots of conditions has been put across by his right-wing coalition partners. And those parties have already agreed that some of them are pulling out of the coalitions, and they threaten him that if you continue with phase two of this deal, there will be a turmoil inside Israel, and they have to go for an early election because they will double the government. And that's Smotrich, his finance minister, and Ben Gavir, the intelligence minister. He's already out in the open saying that he will support Netanyahu, at least for phase one, but not on the phase two of the operation, and calling other parties to join him in toppling the government. So I think Israel is facing lots of pressure, and Netanyahu himself has had lots of pressure inside, A, because of the parent and the families of the victims, and B, because of also the trial that he's been under, because he's been convicted in the Israeli court for many cases. So therefore he will face lots of cases, and the case will be still on in the court. So I think the coming days will be very difficult for the Israeli government to survive on the term and condition of this agreement. But I don't think Netanyahu will be willing to violate it at any stage, especially when President Trump will take office. And President Trump promised Netanyahu that he will allow the annexation of the West Bank into Israel. So I think the shift of now will be from Gaza Strip to West Bank, where there will be more of an attack on the Palestinians, because the main objective of Israel to annihilate the whole of Palestine is still on the table.
Could I ask you a little bit about Donald Trump? He's, of course, set to take office on Monday, January 20th. Could you tell us a little bit about how the region is seeing his return to office? Of course, some people are saying that, look, he's pushed Netanyahu to accept this deal that the Biden administration has put up. But of course, also many people, especially in the Arab world, have said that he has an extremely pro-Israel view. His pick for the ambassador of America to Israel is Mike Huckabee, someone who is a former American governor, also has a very, very pro-Israeli view, and has also supported the annexation of Palestinian territories into Israel. So how are you seeing this? How are a number of West Asian countries seeing Donald Trump? Can he bring some sort of lasting peace, or is he just likely to be very, very pro-Israel in his negotiations and dealings when it comes to the conflict?
Well, this is very clever questions by you, because Mr. Trump, in the first tenure, he promised Israel to have Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel, and also he gave the Syrian-occupied Golan as a gift to Israelis. So the second term, where during the election time, there was also a talk of between him and Netanyahu of annexation of the West Bank. And that's why Trump wanted to make an end to this war, because American also reputation internationally has been at jeopardy because of the blind support of the Israelis. Everybody knows that it was the American who fully supported Israel in this war. And no president in the United States will not vow a complete, loyalty to Israel. Every American president will show how much he's loyal to Israel in his as he's a president. So Trump is not an exception. But the case of Trump here, there are two issues we have to look at it. One is that Trump himself is trying to have his own mark on the American presidency by having a kind of a conflict between him and the deep state. Secondly, he also having lots of issues in his basket. He have the issue of Russia-Ukraine war. He have the issue of Iran. He have the issue of Asia-Pacific, China in particular, and these are the issues he wanted to see. And secondly, he wanted to see an end to this war for two reasons. He wanted also to improve on the Abraham Accord and bring more Arab countries into the fold and joining hands to normalize relations with Israel without recognizing Palestinian issue. And secondly, he wanted to make sure that most of the Arab country will pay the American some sort of money because of the destruction and devastation happened to California. So he's expecting a flowing of billions of dollars. And until and unless he reached some sort of an agreement from the most rejected and the president of the United States, now he's most welcomed in the Arab world, and particularly in putting an end to this war. So I think he understands the game plan in the region, but he will always go along with the Israelis in the American project for West Asia or the Middle East, or even the Israeli project. But they may differ only in the application and the modus operandi.
And you mentioned something that Donald Trump wants. Donald Trump, of course, wants to expand the Abraham Accords. For our viewers, of course, that was an agreement that was struck during the Trump administration's time, where Israel normalized its relationship with several Arab nations. Much of the conversation after that was that Saudi Arabia would really be the crowning achievement of the Abraham Accords, that if Israel could normalize its relationship with Saudi Arabia, there would be a great deal of stability in West Asia. Of course, the problem is that since the Israel-Hamas war has broken out, there has been very little possibility of such an agreement because the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has hardened his language considerably about a normalization with Israel. He said that unless there is some Palestinian statehood, we cannot normalize relations with Israel. So, Dr. Awwad, I wanted to ask you this question about is an incentive for Israel to keep to the terms of the agreement that will Arab countries normalize their relations with Israel without its withdrawal from Gaza? That is the implementation of phase 2. Will Arab countries be open to normalizing their relationship with Israel if Israel does not pull out its troops from Gaza? Or will a number of Arab countries simply say that, look, the Israelis have Donald Trump on their side, they have American power on their side, therefore we will have to achieve some sort of agreement regardless of the fact that Israel is doing what it is in Gaza?
I think the fallout of Gaza war will have lots of lessons to learn for both sides. For Israel, that using power and might and only pressure does not solve the problem in the absence of a political framework or a long-lasting political framework to end occupation, annexation, and recognize a Palestinian state coexisting side by side by Israel, a two-state solution, which is never in the on the agenda of any government of Israel, especially the current government. And after this war, I don't think anybody of Israel, politicians, will be interested in finding the solution. But having said that, I will think also the international community, the Arab world, are putting lots of pressure on the American administration that let us end this war, because without solving the Palestinian cause, there will continue to be a war in this region. And I'm sure even if the United States, even if President Trump put more pressure like he did last time on Arab capital, bring Israel to the negotiating table and make him sit with extra Arab capital, that does not solve the problem. Because even after Camp David, even after Oslo agreement, or in the Beit Araba with Jordan, Palestinian, Egyptian, still there is no peace, or there is no integration of Israel into the society, because it's denying the Palestinians their right of existence. I think it is the longest suffering people in the history of mankind, where they have been suffering and they are not being given the right of existence in their own home, which has been taken by the Israelis. So the annihilation of Palestine does not solve the problem. We need a political solution. That is what I understood. And I think the Israeli leaders have to also recognize the fact that they cannot take Palestine. They cannot kill the people of Palestine or kick them out. But what we are witnessing at the Middle East currently is a different scenario. The scenario is that Syria also has fallen apart. We have also the Jordanian are facing the music. Egypt is at the dire consequences because of the reviving of the Muslim Brotherhood. Turkey in the region is also having its own project, which will be having a conflict with the Israeli one. So there is a sort of uncertainty and turbulence in that part of the world. And Israel may say, I am also surrounded by extremists and violence and radical states. I'm going to go for a Jewish state. There is no question of Palestinians. So the second phase of Israeli project could be that they have to expel the Palestinian from Gaza Strip. They have to expel the Palestinian from West Bank into Jordan and from Gaza into Egypt. And I think that will be more of a chaotic situation. So I don't feel, or I'm a little bit pessimistic of any future of stability in the Middle East unless and until we find a political and a comprehensive peace solution to the Palestinian issue.
So if I could ask you another question about Hamas. We had the American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, make an extraordinary statement just a couple of days ago where he said that Hamas has recruited more soldiers in the last couple of months. And in fact, they have replenished a number of the fighters, a number of the fighting strength that they had lost due to their war with Israel. Therefore, a number of people on Israel's right wing are saying that, look, if Hamas is able to reconstitute itself, we cannot then withdraw from Gaza. We have to continue fighting. What do you make of Antony Blinken's statements that Hamas has managed to reconstitute itself? Does it constitute a failure of Israeli security policy? Antony Blinken certainly seemed to be implying that he felt it was a failure.
I think it's a total failure of Blinken himself, and everybody knows that he is the most disastrous foreign minister of the United States, where he went into Israel and he said, I am coming not as an American, but as an Israeli, a Jew, to the supporting of Netanyahu. I think that message he has worked on and continue the support and only speaking the narrative of the Israeli version of the peace and the atrocities happening in the Middle East and only accusing the Palestinian of being the oppressors. I think that was the wrong foreign secretary ever in the American administration, where everybody knows that his both hands are soaked with the blood of the innocent people. If this deal was put on the table 8 months ago by Blinken and by the Biden administration, can anybody ask why it was not implemented? Why you have to wait for 8 months of bombardment? You have destroyed 90% of the infrastructure of Gaza, hospitals, schools, infrastructure, building, nothing left to leave. You turned it into a kind of a Holocaust. You turned it into a graveyard for thousands of people buried under the debris. And still you are having thousands of people in detention. So what really have you achieved in this? And now after 8 months, you're coming and making this kind of an announcement that it was your administration who reached to this deal. I think it's a shame, and it will be a tag on his face as much as the tag was on the face of Colin Powell when he was deceiving the United Nations Security Council by saying that Saddam Hussein had a nuclear and a weapon of mass destruction. And he regret later that it was a fake. And that is what the American administration, nothing but a fake announcement, and also running a fake, scenarios and a framework to achieve what the other side, and denying the actual people their right of existence. I think I'm not happy, and I don't think he really deserves to be in the history of the American book.
So if I could ask you then about what happens to Gaza moving forward. The reason I was asking you about Antony Blinken's remarks is because it shows to some degree that if Hamas has been able to reconstitute itself, it may then at some point in time, it may spend a couple of months in recovery, rebuilding itself, but then as one of the most powerful militias in Gaza, it may again be able to reassert control, and that will be an outcome that is unacceptable to Israel. So my question to you is, what do you think is going to happen for Gaza? We're talking about reconstruction, but what entity could plausibly take political control in Gaza if the Israelis were to withdraw after during phase 2 of this agreement, the ceasefire deal? Who could possibly take power if not Hamas?
Yes, this is actually the situation on the ground. If you look at the 15 months of continuous war on the Palestinian and the amount of killing and destruction in terms of loss of properties and human, you realize that you have created a ground of an extremism, of a violence nature, of a children who lost their loved one, or definitely also recognize it was only because of Hamas fighters that they could survive the Israeli onslaught and Israel could not achieve its objective. So therefore, there is a still popularity among the Palestinian people of Gaza to support Hamas. But with the new scenarios, with the people, the American also administration and the Israel is adamant about seeing any role of Hamas in the region, we may see the Palestinian authorities taking some sort of a control on those areas. But there is, remember that there was always a conflict between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas because Hamas doesn't recognize Mahmoud Abbas, who has been in power more than 15 years, even after his finishing of his 4-year term, legitimate term. So therefore, there is a conflict, and we are worried more about the internal fighting between the Palestinians if this is going to happen and if the Palestinian Authority take control. And I think the international community, Palestinian, including the Egyptian and the American, we may play a role in bringing the administration of rebuilding and peace negotiation. And I think rebuilding in the sense that Qatar and most of the Arab Gulf countries will step in to rebuild Gaza and help the Palestinians. But to have a militant group inside in Gaza Strip, I think as long as there is occupation, there will be resistance. Hamas is an ideology. Hamas has been, a Palestinian, but it's not Palestine. So therefore, if you continue with the occupation, you will have more than 100 of Hamas now in the ground fighting Israeli, resisting occupation. But if you wanted to resettle the issues, I think reconciliation, rebuilding, and peace building is most important and the prime important, not only for the Palestinian and for the Israeli, but for the international community as well.
Right. Dr. Awwad, I've taken a lot of your time, but if I could ask you a final question, are you personally hopeful that the deal will prove lasting and that there could be a lasting peace in Gaza now, or do you feel like this is simply a small interlude before fighting will likely begin again in a couple of months or perhaps a year?
I think as long as Netanyahu in power in Israel, there will be a violation of this deal. Look at what's happening inside Lebanon and now in Gaza. Despite the signing of the agreement and the truce, there was still bombardment and the drones were attacking. And in spite of the Lebanese deal with Hezbollah and the Israeli government, we had more than 460 violations by the Israeli recorded by the Lebanese army against the Lebanon. So we can expect anything from the Israeli side because they learned the tactic of deceptions and also to play the victim on all the issues, especially when they know that this perpetual provocation will continue as a permanent war. And Israel wanted to achieve its own objectives. See, Israel army have been hurt badly in this war because the idea of a strongest army in the region has been weathered out after this attack by Hamas and after the survival of Hamas against Israel. But I think the overall situation in the region does not give me any sort of optimistic point of view because I'm more realistic in achieving long peace in that part of the world where my country is totally destroyed now. What will happen next is it Iran, is it Iraq that Israel will take on, or is it the Houthis, Ansarullah of Yemen, or is it really they just want to spread extremism from Syria into the neighboring country where Israel will have the upper hand and make sure that this part of the world is disintegrated into small countries? I think it's a very complex situation. Overall situation at the moment, I think the people of the Arab world have lost history and they are not contributing anything in the history. In fact, in the contemporary history, in building peace or making sure that even their influence in the economic side can be used to achieve the political objective of a coexistence. I'm not saying that to be always one war, but to have a peaceful situation. I think the remnants of colonial attitude in certain leaders in vested interest countries is still strong. And this part of the world will be reshaped as a fight between the global power. We should not see what's happening in Middle East or West Asia in isolation of the big power game plan and the fighting between them, especially China and Russia. Because remember, it is the end point of Syria, is the end point of the Silk Route of China, with Syria now is totally gone. And we know that it is Iraq, then Iran, then Afghanistan, then the rest of the world will be taken, because the United States will not allow China to achieve its own objective, neither in Middle East nor in the Asia Pacific.
Understood. Dr. Awwad, thank you so much for your time and for explaining to us your views on this Gaza ceasefire deal that has just been reached. Dr. Awwad, of course, sounding a realistic, if pessimistic note about what this deal will mean and whether it can survive so long as Israel and Hamas remain so far apart on so many key issues. Dr. Awwad, thank you again for your time, and thank you so much to our viewers for joining us here on India Today Global.
Thank you for having me.